welcome Dr. Stephen Dillingham, Director of the Census Bureau, Kevin Smith, the Chief Information Officer of the Census Bureau, Robert Goldencock, Director of Strategic Issues at the Government Accountability Office, Nicholas Marino, Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity Office. You're all here to talk about the 2020 census preparations, which are now in their final stages. We are now in the critical stages of the rollout and administration of the 2020 census. Unfortunately, as we discuss the funding needs for fiscal year 2020, we seem to have more uncertainty than I have ever seen at this point in the decennial cycle. That is almost entirely the result of the decision to try and add an untested citizenship question to the form. While we wait for the Supreme Court to rule on the legality and constitutionality of that addition, I am deeply concerned that the Bureau remains unprepared for and unwilling to admit culpability in creating this situation. In particular, I am worried that the Bureau remains seriously unready to administer a census that includes a citizenship question. I have heard little of any plans to address community fears in immigrant communities about what this information is used for. You're only studying the impact of the question this summer, when it will be too late to adjust outreach and communications. The communication strategies based on the results. Your budget request of $6.149 billion for the 2020 census is inadequate and does not include funding for a contingency fund previously requested by Secretary Ross. I'm not sure if these decisions are yours, Director Dillingham, but it is apparent that the White House and the Secretary have little interest in a fair or accurate census. In other words, the fix is in. I realize, Director Dillingham, this mess is not entirely your fault. After all, you were not confirmed when the decision was made to add a citizenship question to the decennial form, and you report to the Secretary of Commerce, who instigated this political farce in the first place. I have no doubt about your desire or the desire of the thousands of Census Bureau employees to administer a census that is accurately reflects how our country has grown and changed. But you have been dealt a very bad hand, and you are being forced to administer this census at an extreme disadvantage. Today, I hope we can hear about the Bureau's preparations for next year, what challenges remain, and how the Bureau will react when the Supreme Court rules on the validity of the Secretary's process for changing the decennial census form. This committee stands ready to help you in every way possible. And our questions today are designed to highlight our concerns and our community's needs as you move forward. We hope you and your staff are paying close attention to these concerns. This is, of course, something that is on everybody's mind in many communities throughout the country. I can tell you that in mine it's a big issue, and it is everywhere. And it's on the mind of many people in Congress. So I hope that we all pay attention to today's hearings, both here and afar, because this issue still has to be resolved, and we need a fair and accurate count. And with that, let me turn to my friend, Ranking Member Adderholt, for his remarks.
Thank you for yielding, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to welcome all of our witnesses that are here to the Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee today to testify regarding the 2020 census. It's difficult to believe that we're just now 11 months out from Census Day, April 1st, 2020. As we all know, Census Day will represent the culmination of nearly a decade of research, design, integration, and testing of the Bureau's substantial efforts to modernize the census and make it easier for people to respond in at any time and anywhere. I do appreciate the Bureau's commitment to assuring a full, a fair, and accurate count of all Americans in 2020. The Bureau has a monumental task, and it is a task that I know all four of you take very seriously. For FY 2020, the Department of Commerce has requested, as you know, $2.3 billion in additional funding in order to support your efforts to meet the constitutional mandate for the 2020 census. This subcommittee must examine, therefore, whether the funding requested for FY 2020 is adequate to meet your needs, both anticipated and those arising under different contingencies. The ambitious but worthy effort of converting to an internet-based enumeration has required much research, planning, and coordination, not to mention the scaling of complex systems to make sure they can handle the massive amount of data that comes with counting more than 300 million people. I look forward to learning today as we have this hearing about the key indicators of your readiness, such as the 2018 end-to-end test, the status and nature of your communications campaign, the onboarding activities well underway this year. And finally, I'd like to say a few words about the topic I know that there's a lot of concern about by a good number of people. And let me just add, I know a lot of good people disagree on this issue, but I will say I do believe the federal government does have a compelling interest in collecting primary source data on citizenship. By law, the Census Bureau cannot disclose anyone's response or share data from which an individual can be identified, and that goes to even other federal agencies. The law, in my opinion, and what I understand, is very clear on this. A person's response that they are not a citizen does not provide the government with any reliable information about whether they are lawfully present in the United States. There are some who would like to turn this into some kind of campaign of fear surrounding this question, but I really think this can be a situation about education. I look forward to hearing about the census effort to mitigate the skepticism and the lack of awareness associated with every decennial census, and expect to hear that equal focus will be afforded to all segments of the so-called hard-to-count populations, including a lot who live in my home state of Alabama. Many of them lack broadband internet service. A lot of them have rural addresses. And there's, of course, quite a few that distrust the federal government, and it might result in an undercount. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing, and I would yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Now it is my pleasure to introduce my chairwoman, the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Lowy of New York, for her remarks.
Welcome. Thank you, Chairman Serrano and Ranking Member Adeholt, for holding this important hearing. While I frankly was very disappointed that Secretary Ross refused to testify before the subcommittee, and I'm really puzzled about that. I've known the Secretary for a long time, and I was looking forward to hearing from him today. But I'm very pleased to have these esteemed witnesses with us, and I thank you for appearing. The 2020 census is a serious constitutional obligation that must be adequately funded and free of partisan interference. The 2020 count will shape how federal dollars are shared nationwide for the next decade, and that means it determines how much each community receives for schools, roads, health care, and other public services that our constituents rely on daily. Unfortunately, this administration is playing political football with this fundamental function of our government. We know that certain hard-to-reach populations are much more difficult to count than others. Those groups are vulnerable to underestimation. My home state of New York has a number of people who are frequently undercounted, such as African Americans, foreign-born residents, Latinos. Part of the beauty of New York is our diversity, and we must do everything we can to ensure an accurate census count. Underfunding the census puts New York communities that need funding most at risk of losing more than $73.3 billion. On top of funding issues associated with the census, this administration's decision To include the citizenship question is frankly highly offensive and, as multiple federal courts have held, unconstitutional. It is an unnecessary addition and a clear attack on immigrant and other minority communities. Frankly, it must be stopped. Congress and this committee should work together with the Census Bureau to protect our most vulnerable communities, and I look forward to a productive discussion today that highlights ways we can preserve the sanctity of our democracy and best represent our constituents. So I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Dillingham, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Please try to keep it to 5 minutes, and you have our word that every word you wrote will be on the record.
Good morning, Chairman Serrano, Committee Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Adderholt, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. We appreciate your strong support for the Census Bureau and its work. We are deeply grateful to Congress for funding our programs. We are highly confident that the budget request for FY 2020 supports the operation of a complete and accurate count of our nation's population. The budget request has $7.2 billion in total resources. It includes $1 billion in carried over funds. The request represents a $3.3 billion, 88% increase from FY 2019. Of that, $6.3 billion is for the 2020 census. The rest is for other programs, including data processing, dissemination, data releases of the economic census, census of governments, and a collection of monthly, quarterly, and annual data, including the principal economic indicators, the American Community Survey, and other economic, demographic, and geographic programs. In FY 2018, you provided advance funding of nearly $1 billion, allowing us to continue our 2020 census work during the funding lapse, and we thank you. Funding certainty will continue to be a vital need. Presently, we are on schedule, on budget, on message, and on course to complete the biggest and best census ever. We and our partners are excited and committed. Our mission is to count every person once, only once, and in the right place. And with your support, we will accomplish this mission. We have made a number of major improvements, including better technologies for canvassing and enumerating, new options for responding, the internet, the phone, as well as the paper, more language assistance, customer assistance phone centers, more partners and partnership specialists, a sophisticated and expanded media campaign, and advanced IT safeguards and privacy protections. These successes and time-tested operations increase our confidence that we can conduct a complete and accurate census within the budget. During the 2018 end-to-end test, which was our dress rehearsal, we successfully tested and deployed census operations and systems. The results, including the self-response rates, exceeded projections. The systems worked efficiently, enumerator productivity rose about 50%, respondent information was securely encrypted and processed. Confidentiality is a core part of the Census Bureau's culture. It requires response data to be used only for statistical purposes. Those working with the data take a lifetime oath not to share confidential information, including with law enforcement. Unlawful disclosures subject violators to fines and imprisonment. The Bureau has decades of success in carrying out this responsibility. IT security enhancements and preparations for 2020 are underway. In-field address canvassing begins in August. Our communications contractor team includes leaders in advertising and multicultural subcontractors with experience in reaching everyone. We are recruiting trusted voices from communities to motivate people to respond. We are hiring 1,500 local partnership specialists, double that from the last decennial census. We plan to establish a record 300,000 partnerships. Communications and partnerships encourage everyone, especially the hard to count, to respond to the census. We plan to reach undercounted children, areas with limited internet access, rural and remote areas, hard-to-count groups, and households lacking English proficiency through online and phone assistance in English and 12 other languages covering more than 99% of all households, plus materials in 59 languages. We are committed to reaching the hard-to-count populations and have answered the committee's request as to how this might be expanded. In closing, I'm pleased to testify with the Government Accountability Office. We consult closely with GAO on key risks and steps to mitigate them. We have closed about 2/3 of the GAO recommendations. We have action plans for the others. We value GAO input and engagement and encouraged by recent progress. We thank this committee and the Congress for communicating the shared message that the 2020 census is easy, safe, and important. It's easy because you can respond online, by phone, or on paper. This creates new efficiencies, it saves dollars, it relieves burdens, and it reassures people that assistance is but a phone call away. It is safe because we have the latest and best technologies and practices to protect the data and confidentiality, and it is important because it is used to apportion the House of Representatives to allocate the billions of dollars, as was mentioned, and to guide decisions by individuals, communities, businesses, and government at all levels. Finally, we commend the members of this subcommittee and the full committee and the Congress for your interest, support, and valued partnership. We look forward to working together. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenkoff, you are now recognized for 5 minutes, same rules or same request. Try to keep it to 5 minutes and we'll include everything in the record for you.
Sure. Thank you. Chairman Serrano, Chairwoman Lowry, Ranking Member Aderholt, and members of the subcommittee. GAO is pleased to be here today to discuss the Census Bureau's readiness for the 2020 head count. As you know, in recent years, we have identified a number of operational, IT, cybersecurity, and other challenges that raise serious concerns about the Bureau's ability to conduct a cost-effective enumeration. In February 2017, we added the 2020 census to GAO's list of high-risk government programs, and it remains on our high-risk list today. My remarks this morning will focus on two such challenges: implementing design innovations aimed at controlling costs and developing reliable cost estimates that better account for risks and inform annual budget requests. My colleague, Nick Marinos, will then discuss the challenges the Bureau faces in implementing and securing critical IT systems. The bottom line is that as the countdown to Census Day grows short, the Bureau has made important progress toward mitigating some of the risks facing the census, and we are encouraged by the Commerce Department and the Census Bureau's leadership commitment toward carrying out a cost-effective enumeration. Still, the Bureau estimates that the census may cost as much as $15.6 billion, which is a $3 billion increase over the Bureau's original estimate, and significant operational uncertainties lie ahead. For example, with respect to design innovations, to help control costs while maintaining accuracy, the Bureau will use new procedures and technology for 2020, including greater use of automated data collection methods, administrative records in place of data collected by enumerators, verifying most addresses using aerial imagery and other in-office procedures rather than by going door to door, and allowing households the option of responding to the census via the internet. These innovations show promise for controlling costs, but they also introduce new risks, in part because they have not been used extensively, if at all, in earlier enumerations. As a result, testing is essential to ensure that key IT systems and operations will function as planned. However, citing budgetary uncertainties, the Bureau scaled back operational tests in 2017 and 2018. Without sufficient testing across a range of geographic locations, housing types, living arrangements, and demographic groups, operational problems can go undiscovered, and the opportunity to refine procedures and systems could be lost. Another risk factor is the reliability of the Bureau's 2020 life cycle cost estimate. In August 2018, we found that although the Bureau had taken steps to improve its cost estimation process compared to prior iterations, it still needed to implement a system to track and report variances between actual and estimated cost elements. The Bureau plans to release an updated version of the cost estimate sometime this spring. To ensure that this and any future versions reflect best practices, it will be important for the Bureau to implement our open recommendations. In short, while the Bureau and the Department of Commerce have taken important steps to keep preparations for the decennial on track, additional steps are needed. For example, over the past decade, GAO has made 97 recommendations to help address risks facing the 2020 census. The Department of Commerce has generally agreed with these recommendations and has taken actions to address many of them. However, as of April 2019, 24 of the recommendations have not been fully implemented. Going forward, to help ensure a cost-effective headcount in the months ahead, continued leadership attention and strong congressional oversight will be needed to help ensure that the Bureau implements our open recommendation, that key components and systems work as required, that preparations stay on schedule, and that management functions follow leading practices. This concludes my prepared remarks. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Nick Marinos, who will discuss the risks facing the Bureau's IT and cyber efforts.
Director Marinos, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Serrano, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Adderholt, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting GAO to discuss the Bureau's efforts to prepare for the 2020 census. As Robert mentioned, our most recent high-risk report highlighted a number of IT-related challenges. These included IT systems readiness and cybersecurity. To sum up where we stand today, significant work still remains for the Bureau to address these challenges prior to the 2020 census. Starting with systems readiness. The Bureau plans to rely heavily on IT for the 2020 census, including through using over 50 systems across different stages of census operations. Many of these systems will be deployed multiple times in order to add needed functionality over the course of 16 operational deliveries planned by the Bureau. Last fall, the Bureau delivered the first group of systems to support early hiring and training, and the next 4 months will see key testing and production deadlines for many additional systems. However, our written statement notes that the Bureau is at risk of not meeting near-term system development and testing schedule milestones for 2 upcoming operational deliveries. These include deliveries that support address canvassing, which is intended to verify the location of housing units across the country, and internet self-response, a new innovation that the Bureau intends to rely on for a significant portion of responses to the census. The Bureau needs to closely monitor the risks associated with systems that support these 2 important census activities in order to ensure that they are all delivered on time. Regarding cybersecurity, the Bureau has efforts underway to assess the security of its systems and identify weaknesses that need fixing. To the Bureau's credit, it has established a risk management framework that requires it to conduct a security assessment for each system expected to be used for the 2020 census, and to address any security vulnerabilities identified through the course of testing. We're encouraged that in addition to performing its own assessments, the Bureau is coordinating with the Department of Homeland Security on cybersecurity issues. Through assessments conducted over the last 2 years, DHS has made 17 recommendations aimed at improving the Bureau's cybersecurity posture and strengthening its ability to respond to potential cyber threats. These internal and external assessment activities and their findings are critical, especially since the majority of the Bureau's systems that will support 2020 operations contain personally identifiable information. However, our written statement calls for significant management attention by Commerce and Bureau leadership in order to ensure that security deficiencies are not only identified but corrected. Specifically, we're making 2 recommendations today. The first calls for the Bureau to address its security to-do list in a timelier manner. Recent data indicates that the Bureau has been challenged in meeting its self-prescribed timeframes for taking corrective actions for security weaknesses, including those it designates as high or very high risk. Resolving identified vulnerabilities within these timeframes can help reduce the risk that unauthorized individuals may exploit weaknesses to gain access to sensitive information and systems. The second recommendation calls for the Bureau to improve its process for tracking and completing corrective actions in response to DHS's assessments and recommendations. At the present time, the Bureau has yet to fully establish such a formal process. The bottom line is that the security assessment efforts conducted by DHS and the Bureau itself will only be as valuable as the security fixes that the Bureau fully implements. In summary, we're running short on time before key census operations begin. Moving forward, it will be vital for the Bureau to devote enough time and effort to complete IT system development activities and address identified security weaknesses in a timely and prioritized way. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement.
Thank you. Director Dillingham, as I mentioned in my opening statement, there is a greater degree of uncertainty with regard to the administration of of the 2020 census than any decennial census I have dealt with. We're currently waiting for the Supreme Court to determine the legality and constitutionality of the addition of a citizenship question on the 2020 form. But the Bureau has had to continue preparing for the 2020 census regardless. My understanding is that you essentially have two versions of the 2020 census ready to go for printing. However, what is less clear to me is whether your outreach, communications, and partnership activities also have two parallel paths. Question, what is the Bureau doing to prepare for the Supreme Court's decision? Do you have different strategies for deployment depending on results, and can you share those changes with us today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to update you, and I appreciate the concerns about uncertainty surrounding the decennial census in some quarters and in the media, et cetera. I can assure you that you asked if we had two different plans. For printing purposes, in the beginning of July, we do. We have two systems ready to go as to which questionnaire will be printed. But after that, we have a process in place and an execution plan that will proceed regardless. Now, one of the issues, as you have pointed out and as Committee Chairwoman Lowy has pointed out, is, well, what about there could be a question on citizenship in there, and how might that impact? And we're conducting a study this summer. The results will be available in October for just the purpose of operational needs. So as a result of doing a survey of 480,000 households, half with the question and half without, that will better inform us as to any particular needs for deploying our resources. You mentioned how we're preparing for the census overall. We have an extensive campaign that I'd be glad to brief you and other members of the committee, but one element that I want to bring to your attention is our communications plan and our integration with partnerships. We're going to deploy twice as many partnerships into the communities, particularly the hard-to-reach communities, and our targeting messages with the campaign will be to reach the hard-to-count populations. So we have a number of subcontractors creating messages specifically for the hard-to-count populations.
But there seems to be, unless I heard it wrong, a contradiction here. That Mr. Marinos, Director Marinos, tells us that he's concerned, or his department's concerned, that you are not moving fast enough to take care of some needs within the Bureau for the census. And then you tell me that you'll be ready to deal with whatever decision the Supreme Court hands down. Isn't there a contradiction there?
We don't see a contradiction, Mr. Chairman, but an explanation. You know, the GAO has over time and for a number of years been monitoring and presenting progress reports, and we're very pleased that they have done that. We're also pleased with the Inspector General, with the Congress and others, the department leadership. We have a number of people looking over our shoulders as to where we are. Now, most recently in today's testimony, the GAO has highlighted 4 specific areas which were mentioned in their comments, and that is the areas of innovations and some of the challenges there with implementing IT, with making sure we have the cybersecurity safeguards, and also in our cost estimates and cost control measures. The first, when we were placed on the high-risk list, which was deservedly so, this is one of the largest projects, one of the largest hirings of civilian employment since World War II, and it happens every 10 years, as you're well aware from prior censuses. This is a mammoth operation. It deserves special scrutiny, and it deserves the resources that are needed to get the job done. So yes, we're on the high-risk list. I expect we will be on there until we complete this census, and every census will probably be on the high-risk list. That being said, the 5 areas of improvement the GAO previously pointed out, with the leadership, with the capacity, with the action plans, with the monitoring, and with demonstrating results, they say that we have made substantial progress, and on the leadership, they said we have met those needs. Now, today, we're still focused on continuing needs. The 4 that I pointed out with the innovations, this will be the most innovative census by far. It's a sea change from prior censuses. We will be collecting most of the information during this census electronically. That is a major change. It has always been on paper. A substantial amount will still be on paper, but we are collecting information by the internet, by phone, and our enumerators will have electronic devices. So it will be more efficient, and there will be challenges, and there are challenges. We are meeting those challenges. We have identified more than 26,000 tasks as a part of this census with tens of thousands of relationships. Nevertheless, we monitor on a weekly basis more than 100 of those critical tasks and activities. And we do color code it, as Gio points out, some are in yellow, and actually we have sometimes some in red. So that is a process by which we look at all these important tasks. We give them a green or shades of green, and if it needs management attention, we put it in yellow. And if it's more than 9 days late, and this has been going on for several years, we put it in red to make sure we get the people and the resources assigned to that particular need. So we're very pleased. We're going to be busy. We're going to be fulfilling these needs. We're going to continue to make progress up until the completion of the census, but there's a lot of work yet to be done. That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to stop here because I want to let Mr. Adderholt ask his questions so that we can move to our chairwoman, because I know she's got 12 committees to attend. Mr. Adderholt.
I will refer to her if she needs to. I know she's got a lot of committees to go to, so go ahead.
You are so gracious.
Bipartisanship at its best.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you very much.
You realize you
and
made me look very bad, right? That I didn't do.
I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Oh, you don't have a clock. I was saying I'll make sure I stick to my time. Thank you again to the panel for appearing before us, and this is really so important and very exciting to know what you'll be doing electronically. I hope that a great percentage of the people can understand how to use the electronics you are offering. I want to get back to the citizenship question again, because as a career statistician, and you are an expert, you must be concerned that Census is asking the citizenship question, which has not been asked of the entire nation in nearly 70 years. Are you worried? Are you worried that in the current political environment, this question could have a very negative effect on the 2020 census count, especially in places like New York, where the chairman and I are very well aware of these challenges? Could you give us a straight answer about this?
I certainly will, but let me first of all mention, you mentioned New York, and I had the opportunity last week to visit areas of New York City and to visit 4 districts, and including your own district, both the chairman and your districts. I very much appreciated meeting with your staff there. We also visited other members of this committee and some not on this committee. We visited their districts. What we looked at in those districts were the hard-to-count populations. As you pointed out, you have a very diverse district.
Sure do.
And you do have hard-to-count populations. Now, in your districts, your self-response rate is higher than the national average, and that's a good thing. But there are pockets, there are tracks within your district, and we track them, we have them on our website, and we, during the census, will have that in real time. You can look at these tracks and see how they're responding. So even though you're above average overall in your congressional district, some of those areas are less than half that. So what we're trying to do is get our resources and our partnership specialists and to work with your partners to make sure we reach those populations. And I will say that I've seen the list of your partnering organizations. The chairman has, I must say, the longest list so far, but it's changing daily. And one member who's not on this committee was so pleased with the length of her list that she said she may be speaking with you for a healthy competition, and we would welcome that. But we cannot perform this census without these partnerships, without the people from your communities in New York City and other jurisdictions. They're the key. So we're going to be partnering with them and partnering them in many different ways. On the citizenship question, part of that is really the manifestation of concerns is, will it reduce the response rate? And will we perhaps not be able to count everyone? We are designing some of the best media campaign, some of which are located in New York City, at least the national headquarters know those communities. We have some of the subcontractors that know the various communities, and we will have partnership specialists from those communities. And where the English is not the primary language, they will be speaking those languages. So yes, we have a plan in place, and yes, we intend to carry it out, and we're focused, laser focused on reaching those hard-to-count populations, such as in your area. So if a population feels particularly that the question causes them concern, we want to address it, and we want to address it as soon as possible and right out front. And we're going to do that to a large extent through our media campaign. We need everyone to understand that the census is easy to complete, that it's safe to complete. We do not release any information except aggregate data. We release numbers. So should be no fear among individuals completing the census, because at the end of the day, we have aggregate numbers for geographical areas.
But I interrupted that point because I'm really puzzled, and this is a serious question.
Yes.
So if you have a building with 20 apartments in it, and the person who's helping you, you said you're dealing with all kinds of people, know that in 50% of those apartments, they're not citizens. Okay, but they should be counted for the census, but they're not citizens. Is there going to be a process where someone says, look, okay, 10 of these apartments, they're not citizens, who are they? I am puzzled as how somebody could feel comfortable being interviewed if that material is going to this administration with the citizenship question.
Sure.
And certainly, as Chairman Serrano and I know in New York, we give more money to Washington than we get from Washington. We need the money. So I just want to know, how will the process work? Now, many of these people may have access online, but if they're follow-ups, one of your assistants will say, there are 20, whatever, I said 30 apartments in this building, half of them are not citizens. What's the next step? What is your responsibility?
Chairman Lowy, when we met with your staff, we were lucky enough to meet with some of those partners and some of those local government officials. We went through the neighborhoods in your district. We found exactly those. We saw some of the New York City Housing Authority complexes. We were told that in some instances, those people may not be citizens. We're told in some instances there will be more than one family per unit in those complexes. There are challenges, and that is why we're going to devote all of our resources and talents, but more importantly, working with the partners in your community to ensure that we understand that complex, that we know who the trusted voices are, and that we have...
Excuse me for a minute, because I don't want to take advantage of your generosity and giving me the time. I know you're very kind, and I know you're going to use all the partners. What is your responsibility regarding citizenship? You have a building, you have someone helping you who knows everyone in that building. They also know 50, 60% may not be citizens. What can you do? What do you do? What are you ordered to do with that information?
Chairwoman, we are ordered to take account, and we're going to do everything that we can to ensure people self-respond.
To take account.
To take account of those people.
Pass that information on to some other authority. Let's face it.
Exactly. That would be a legal violation, and if I was to prove that, I would go to prison, and if anyone in the Census Bureau does it, they're subject to fines and imprisonment.
So let me repeat it, because I think this is the key question that we are worried about in many of our communities. You go to a building, and I'm sure you've been to Portchester, Tarrytown, several of those communities. You know, or the person is helping you know, that 50%, I'm just saying, of the people there are not citizens. You are just interested in the count of the number of people there. You are not directed, you have no order, you have no responsibility to report to anyone, Secretary Ross, how many people are citizens and how many are not. Is that correct? That
is exactly correct, except for the fact that we encourage everyone to complete all the questions on the form.
I know that. But if a person is a non-citizen in a building, whether they're 50%, 30%, 20%, and there have been pickups by ICE in these communities, your responsibility is to count the numbers. And you have no order or directive based on information you've gotten by responsible leaders to report to Secretary Ross how many people did not respond to the citizenship question, and based on your advice or assistance, 50% are not citizens. You have no directive to do that.
You are exactly correct, Chairwoman.
Thank you very much.
Before I go to Mr. Adderhold, you please forgive me for this, but I can't pass this up. So we know that you're not supposed to give information out by law. But there's a reason for putting that question there. On down the line, you'll give us a lot of information about who we are as a people, what we look like, where we come from, how many of us were born overseas, how many were born here. Why do I fear that at some point you'll also say, and X amount are not citizens, and X amount are undocumented, which you were not supposed to do in the Constitution, regardless of what the court does now. They may have to rewrite that part of the Constitution, which just count the people amongst the states, nothing else. So you're telling her, and this, I want this on the record again, and then I'll close, that you have no instructions, the Census Bureau, to take citizenship question information and pass it on to the administration or to someone else.
Mr. Chairman, that is exactly correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for Director Dillingham and Associate Director Smith. I'll direct this question to y'all. Unfortunately, about 80% of the 24 million American households don't have reliable, affordable, high-speed internet that live in rural areas. And it's easy for individuals who reside in cities and suburbs to overlook the fact that many of our rural communities, particularly in my home state of Alabama, still lack broadband internet technology, whether it's to educate their children, expand their businesses, whatever the case may be, and not to mention to respond to a census. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing to really concentrate on those rural areas where there is no internet technology, and how you can make sure that you have those accurately counted?
Ranking Member, thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. We do have special plans for rural areas, and we consider them part and parcel with the hard-to-count areas. So if people, residential areas, do not have much connectivity, we have a separate process that by which we process the collection of the data. And that is that we have a process where, in the first instance, we have about 5 contacts we make with these people by mail, and but we will send out in the first instance, if connectivity is low, we will send out a letter and instructions along with the census form. So in the other areas, in the other 80% of the areas, we typically wait to the 4th contact, because we encourage people to go online or get on their phone and to answer the census. But we do it in those areas, those special areas, where we provide the form up front, and then again on the 4th contact, we give them the form again. But in addition to that, we also are educating the people and notifying in the correspondence and through our partnership specialists, as well as through our media, that they can make a phone call. And in many of those areas, they have access to phones, or they know people who do have access to phones. So they can answer the census by phone. And then finally, we have the non-response follow-up. So if we don't get responses by the internet, if we don't get responses by phone, if we don't get the written responses, then ultimately we do send people out, and they will knock on doors. So we... That's the more expensive way of getting the information and contacting them. So we expect that people that with limited connectivity that we will reach, we will collect much of that information electronically, regardless. But we will encourage and we will do the follow-up needed to make sure we reach them.
Well, all of us as members, we talk to groups, constantly, whether groups from our constituencies that are here in Washington, or we're back in our districts that are talking to different groups. What can we do to help in this regard? Not just in regard to those who don't have internet, but just in general.
Well, there are a couple of things, and one is a member of Congress. We will be distributing some kits to your offices on how congressional offices can particularly be of assistance and how they can work with the partnership groups more closely. But most importantly is really the public message that completing the census is easy. You got 3 ways now, very easy. If you do have the internet access, you can do it by phone, or you can do it in the traditional written form. So that's the first time. This is the first time where most of the information that we will be collecting is going to be collected electronically and stored and transmitted electronically and protected electronically. But the easiness is a very important message. The safety, particularly as the chairwoman and as the chairman here has pointed out, there's a concern about possible fears in the community. We want to make sure they understood. The dialogue that we just had is that this information is protected. Only for statistical purposes will it be used. It will not be shared with other agencies, and their identities, the confidentiality, will be protected in a number of ways. In some ways are brand new ways with the latest technologies that we might discuss with you later, but it's easy, it's safe, and then it's important. We also want to encourage, the theme of this year's campaign is shape your future, start here. So you will see that in the creative media, commercials, you'll see it in print, hear it on the radio, you'll see it in the social media. Shape your future, start here. So we're encouraging people to know, and the stakeholder groups understand how important this data is. We're going to need to reinforce that message that it's in their interest, it's in their community's interest, it's in their group interest, community interest, and many of the partners that we have are spreading that word. We're working with the libraries across the nation. They're going to be assisting. They're going to make their computers available. So in some of those areas that may be more remote, there's usually at least a library in those areas, and the libraries of America are going to be our partners. So there are a number of ways we're going to reach those people, encourage, and the message that I would leave is, again, the simplification, easy, safe, and important. And that's kind of the theme that we're reinforcing.
You mentioned these kits that you're going to be distributing to members of Congress. When will those be available?
My understanding is within a matter of weeks. It could be a month or two, but I will be checking into that. I've asked that question, and it will be in relatively short order. This summer you will.
And again, these kits will help us do what now?
They will help congressional districts to help organize, work with the partners. They will also tell you more about what we have online and on the website, how you can track your districts, and you will know the tracts that are hard to count populations. So you can just go right online and see that in my district, I have these tracts that where the self-response rate is lower than my district, and you can make special efforts in those areas. But our partnership specialists will be working with you on that, and our media campaign will be devoting resources directly to that.
And I understand this is the first time that the questionnaires for the census will be electronic and not paper. Is that correct?
Well, you have the option. You have the options. You can certainly do it by paper if that's what you'd like to do.
But historically, it's always been paper,
That is
right?
correct. That is
so this
correct.
is the first time that it won't be.
The first time the internet and the phone will be
Has
used.
there been any discussion about backup on paper, so for when this in the future is studied, when it is released? Of course, eventually, after how many years is it that you can, 70 years or
72 years.
72 years. You know, obviously, we're seeing results from 72 years ago now. But this will be very important to look back for historical reasons. Has there been any that this will be backed up on paper?
I'm not certain. Let me get back to you, but I don't know what the printed products might be with the actual data, but we have the electronic data. I haven't been briefed exactly if we're going to be storing that information in another.
Yeah, the reason I asked that, in 72 years, I have a feeling the electronics they will use then will be different we use today.
Exactly.
So I think it's you know, I'm thinking from a historical standpoint now.
I
not
can
from-
assure you, no, the Census Bureau, as the nation's largest collector of data and information, will have ways that people will be able to access, and even the electronic data will be able to access. But let me ask our CIO if he may have some other insights on this.
Okay.
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to add that within technology changes and backing up of electronic data, there are absolutely migration paths to use the more modern technology. So electronic records have been stored for long periods of time, 70 years, 90 years, or some of the stipulations people have, and there are technology ways to move from old technology to new technology to keep that data electronically archived to the right period of time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case.
Good morning, Dr. Dillingham. Can I follow up, please, on my committee and subcommittee chair's questions on citizenship, but not only citizenship, because you have assured us that information will not be shared. And I take by that you're referring to individual information. However, the census does report its results.
That is correct.
And so therefore, if you ask a citizenship question or any other question for that matter, ethnicity, income, there is a report, a public report of that information. So there will be a public report, I would assume, at some level on, if a citizenship question is on the census, of where people are or are not citizens, correct?
We will have aggregate data that it sometimes will be geographic. That is correct.
Okay, and so my question then is, how granular is that aggregate data? Do you report down to the tract level, or do you report lower than that? And where I'm obviously going with this is, okay, fine, you talk about the individual data not being available. However, at some level, there's a pretty good interpolation of the data reported to make inferences as to some level of specificity, and I'm wondering how specific that is and what the policy judgments are behind that specificity and the consequences.
Congressman, that's an excellent question. And things are changing in that regard. There is an interest, and there are some people, particularly researchers and others, that want the most granular data possible. And we collect data by the blocks, we aggregate blocks, and then we have tracks. One of the new protections we're putting in place as a result of our research was that we do not want in the future people with great computer capabilities and with other data sets to try to match the data and try to figure out and identify individuals. So one of the trade-offs that we have in protecting data, and we call this disclosure avoidance, is that we actually inject noise into the data at the lowest levels, so that data at the lowest level, perhaps at a block level, will not be accurate at that level. But when you aggregate the data at a certain level, it will have increased accuracy.
Okay, so let me just cut to the chase here. At what level do you actually report the results? Is it at the tract level? So in other words, X tract somewhere in Y state has 20% non-citizens in it. What level is that at?
My understanding is that we're focused on the tract level, and but exactly the format by which, in the units by which it will be tabulated, I would have to get back to you. But it is a change from past practice, and we do have some data users that have legitimate concerns that they will not have the granularity that they once had.
I do understand the trade-off. So, and by the way, I'm not making a policy judgment, at least in these questions about citizenship or anything else. I'm just trying to understand what is that trade-off? And following up on that, have you considered, with a question as controversial as citizenship, and there's two sides to that argument, have you considered injecting more noise at a higher level for a particular question that is a more sensitive question, so that it cannot be traced back with such granularity as, for example, you know, I can look up the last census and identify with some specificity how many Japanese Americans are living in Y tract in downtown Honolulu. Have you considered elevating the noise to a higher level than tract? to address the concerns over the misuse of this data, public data, by the way?
Congressman, we haven't made a determination yet as to the level. We're still continuing to study it with some of the best minds in the country, and we can get back and advise you where we are in that process, but as of yet, we have not decided. We view it somewhat as a dial, and you have to set the dial on a certain level of protection. And the intent here, and the reason we're doing this, and employing the newest and best techniques from high-tech industry and from academics, is just for that purpose of protecting people for any question, identifying individual answers to those things. But we will have aggregate data for some geographical area that will reflect answers to the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Roby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for making time to be with us this morning and speak before this committee. Of course, as been said, I'm sure multiple times in my absence, we're almost exactly 1 year to the date from the next year's census. And I'm sure you're aware Alabama's a state that has some concerns that we could potentially lose a congressional seat, which has more than just the obvious implications. And as you can see, and I know you've already talked to my colleague from Alabama, you have two of us sitting up here this morning. And so I just want to highlight the census and its future outcome further. In the 2010 census, Alabama did not do as good of a job as we could for accounting for all of its people, especially our youngest population, children below the age of 6. But particularly in rural communities. So we have to make sure that that's not the case again in next year's count. And I know Mr. Adderholt already talked about the issue of rural Alabama, rural America. And my understanding is that there will be a strong focus on advertising and the use of social media platforms to get the word out regarding the census. But you need to know rural America doesn't always have access to social media platforms because they don't have access to broadband, which is going to be a challenge in order to make sure that folks are aware of what's going on. So I just want to give you the opportunity to talk about what methods do you have to build in to make sure that these rural areas get the message, and particularly those that may not have access to the internet or to social media platforms. What's the plan?
Thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. And I do note there is a joinder of interest with the other member here in this area. So we had a previous discussion on the rural areas and some of the challenges. You correctly point out that the undercount of children is a major concern. That's a hard-to-reach population, hard-to-count population. And we're doing a number of things, both nationally and locally, and working with our partners. I have meetings this afternoon, as a matter of fact, with the Annie E. Casey Foundation in Baltimore, who has been leading in this area for making sure we remedy the undercount and potential undercount of children. We're working with partners everywhere, the medical community, the pediatrics associations. Just on Sunday morning, the deputy director was over in Baltimore at the Pediatrics Association meeting, and they're very interested in what they can do. We have statistics in school programs where we're working with the educational communities. We're trying to educate from a variety of perspectives, particularly the households, the importance of counting children. And it is, using that population, it is very difficult. There are non-traditional family structures these days, and sometimes very, without any intention whatsoever, we're getting an undercount because the children may be with the grandmother or a trusted family friend, and they may not consider them their children, so they don't count them. So we are training our enumerators, and we're training others to make sure we get a complete count, particularly with the undercount problem with children up until age 5. That's a particular concern. But there are other communities, and certainly the rural areas, as we mentioned, we're going to use all the media that we can, the radio, et cetera. So even though the television coverage may be limited in some areas. We want to use radio. We do use the social media, but as you say, if the connectivity is low, we have to have other ways to reach them. We do that through our partnerships. So we have an integrated campaign with our media and our partners. So we have double the number of partnerships. We will have partners in every state. And there will be partnerships, numerous partnerships, reaching every congressional district. And when we send out the toolkits and stuff, it'll explain this in greater detail.
And just lastly, and I appreciate your answer, and I hope you'll keep us posted on any additional developments there. But Alabama and other states across our country have been beaten with hurricanes and tornadoes and other powerful storms. There's been flooding throughout the Midwest and fires throughout California. So what is the Census Bureau doing as it relates to make sure that those displaced from their homes as a result of a national disaster are being included in next year's count?
Again, Congresswoman, that's an excellent question. I know there's particular interest with Puerto Rico, and we have special procedures we're going to implement where we reach and we verify the address physically. Someone will go to those residencies, they will verify the address, and they will also leave information for completing the census, including the census form. So we call that update leave. So that is where we have people that actually go to every address. There's such an area in Florida. There's one in California that was subject to the terrible fires in California. And should something else occur between now and or during the collection of that information, we will have that resource available.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you again for being here.
Mr. Christ.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panel for being here today. Appreciate your cooperation. Dr. Dillingham, do you agree that the key to an accurate and successful census is making sure every single person is in fact counted?
Absolutely, that's our number one goal.
And do you agree that minority, immigrant, low-income, and rural communities tend to be some of the most difficult to count, but that those communities often have the most at stake in the census, since the data is used to distribute federal resources and support programs?
Congressman Christ, we consider the hard-to-count population our number one priority, and we're going to be working and targeting those populations. And one of the benefits, as was pointed out with our innovations, is now we can take the capacity to respond to the census directly into that community. They don't have to leave the community. They don't have to go to a bricks and mortar office somewhere else in the city or somewhere else in the area. We want to reach them directly and through their internet, through their telephones, et cetera. We hope they'll be able to answer. We'll encourage them to answer, working with our partners from wherever they are, whenever they want to.
Are you going to dedicate additional resources for that purpose?
We have doubled our partnerships.
I don't know what that means.
Well, where we have a partnership, partnership specialists we've doubled, but we're increasing our partnership. We have national partners. As you're well aware, in Florida, we have state commission for complete count. In the local areas, we have local complete count committees. But apart from that, we also have national partners and we have local partners. And we envision more than 300,000 partners. So when I saw a list the other day when I was in New York City, and we're looking at, I don't want to miss the number here, but there were at least 6 partners already with the chairman's district, where a list that we have, people working in his congressional district that are already partnering with us. So the outreach through the partnerships are so valuable. I can't stress that enough. Without the partnerships, we would not be able to nearly as effectively reach those hard-to-count populations.
Okay, thank you. And you've stated that you're going to have an advertising campaign to try to make people aware, to not be, God bless you, concerned or frightened or worried about the census, and that it will be easy. I imagine you have a budget already dedicated for that. How much is that budget?
Our media and outreach budget is about $500 million. It is the largest budget ever. I think the last decennial census, it was somewhere around $350 million. So it's a substantial investment, and we think it will prove to be a very wise investment.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you, Federal agencies rely on the census data to make decisions about law enforcement, healthcare, equal employment opportunities, among other things, and that LGBTQ people have needs and experiences unique to their communities. LGBTQ advocates have long pushed for questions regarding sexual orientation, gender identity to be included on the census. In 2017, the Census Bureau appeared to propose including those types of questions in the, quote, subjects plan for the 2020 census report. Then almost as quickly as the questions were added, they disappeared. I know this happened before your tenure began, but in response, the Census Bureau released a statement calling the LGBTQ inclusion, quote, a mistake. Do you consider including questions about a marginalized, vulnerable, and disenfranchised population a mistake, particularly if it helps to direct needed resources to the appropriate locations?
Congressman Christ, that is a topic that we work closely with the communities, and we have representatives of those communities on our advisory board. They are also very prominent members of our stakeholder groups, and they're partnering with us in many different ways. The wording of this decennial census has been decided. It was decided and approved by the Office of Management and Budget a few years ago. And so the wording will not change for this decennial census, but our outreach to those communities will change. We are going to make sure that our trusted partners in all those communities are working with us and ensuring that their communities know the importance, as you well pointed out, the importance of this data. So the data is important in so many different ways, not just with government, but even in the private sector, even in individual decisions and community decisions. But the particular community, the LGBTQ community, that information is not collected in this decennial census, but we do have some changes in the census. We do ask people about the sex of their spouse, and if it's a same-sex spouse, they can mark it on the census. So, but that doesn't resolve the issues of the future about where might the wording go. I can tell you that we have a number of people that are studying this. We will continue to study this. We will continue to work with those groups, and we will look at options and certainly consider in the future how those questions might be asked.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
Director Dillingham, you were in Detroit recently, and thank you.
I very much appreciate that visit and appreciate your attending that function.
And I appreciate you being there, because the concern that we have as one of the hard-to-count communities, and as my colleague have said, being one of those communities that need the most. During your visit, you were talking about the questionnaire assistance centers. I want to know my question is, how many locations will there be? How many staff hours will be devoted? And do you have a plan yet to roll those out? And when can we expect to receive the plan?
Congresswoman, first let me express my pleasure with the meeting in Detroit. I learned so much about Detroit. I learned so much about the hard-to-count areas. Saturday morning, we went on tours of the hard-to-count areas in Detroit, along with the city officials and partners. We learned so much. Detroit has unique residential needs. There's much being done in Detroit, particularly the revitalization, but in those neighborhoods, Detroit, as you well know, is more than 140 square miles. It's lost more than 1 million in population. It has lost population in every census since 1950. With the manufacturing that kind of dried up in Detroit, it created unique challenges in those neighborhoods. And we saw those challenges, and we're very pleased to see the partners and appreciate them educating us to those challenges. Detroit is, you could argue that every city is unique, but Detroit, going through a bankruptcy, et cetera, is a very unique city situation. Now, the hard to reach populations there, and it gets back to sort of, if I have a theme here, It is we want to take the capacity directly into those communities. When I went through the districts, relatively new districts in Detroit, we saw civic centers that were vibrant. We saw areas where people got together. There were still active churches and houses of worship in Detroit. And we think we need to get the capacity directly to the people in those communities where they can complete the census. And we can do it with laptops, we can do it with phones, and we can do it
So
with our
those
partners.
community centers will be officially the assistance centers?
Well, let me explain that the Appropriations Committees ask us to look at two options, to study two options.
Okay.
If we had enhanced resources, where would we recommend applying them, and what's our assessment? When we looked at the questionnaire assistance centers, we recommended that we would not be taking action, that it was not feasible, that by the time you go through the process of getting the leases, et cetera, a year-long process, a year-and-a-half long process, it really wasn't as cost-effective as we would have hoped.
So we're not going to do that?
What we're going to do, we're going to have partnerships and we're going to have resources with every library. All the libraries of the nation will be open for business in helping to explain and helping to assist, including internet use. We're going to have other areas. We have partnership specialists in Detroit. We want to beef that up, and we have the multitude of partners.
So, Director, I do want to put this concern.
Sure.
One of the things using the library, a lot of our public libraries, especially in the poorer neighborhoods, have been closed or have limited hours. They're only open so many days a week. It is important that we create that sense of energy in those communities. Now, I didn't know you weren't going to do the assistance centers, but we need the plan, because for us to be partners in those communities, we need to know where they are, how we support it, and I'm concerned about the time. So we are rapidly approaching, and so we can't be talking about this. They should be identified, and then as a member of Congress, I can monitor and engage and make sure I'm being supportive. So when will I know where you will partner and where they're going to be?
Congresswoman, we delivered a report to the committee yesterday. I think, my understanding, it was delivered yesterday in response to the appropriations request on how we could beef up partnerships if additional resources were added. So there is a plan there. But I can tell you we have an existing plan by doubling our partnerships in those communities. But we did submit to the record, it was requested by Appropriations that we present a plan on what we would do with partnerships. And that plan actually, conceptually, I think is very promising for the circumstances and the needs you point out.
Again, promising is one thing. I'm very concerned about the presence in the community. And I tell you, I want to see, once we do our work and the funds are approved, I expect a fast turnaround to identify these communities, places where you're going to be. And I can't tell you, this leads into my last point here, is that where are we in the timeline of being effective? Because we are far behind the census that, as a mayor of a city, I was further ahead than I am now. And so I don't want excuses. I don't want, we don't have a plan yet. And then I get the pushback from the community. I get calls every day that people are so concerned about us not being able to do a full count.
Congresswoman, we do have a plan. What I was referring to was the committee asked us for an additional plan if other circumstances occurred. The plan, and I think it was a good evidence, the meeting we had at Mercer Law School, all the partners in the communities that want to work with us, the ones that took us through the city of Detroit and showed us those special areas, they're going to be our partners. On our partnership specialist hiring, I was informed this morning that we have over 900 that are either hired or in the process. They have accepted those jobs. So out of the 1,501, we have more than 900 being hired. That being said, what is important, as you well point out, is not just having the plan, but it's executing that plan.
Yes.
So we want to work with all the partners in the Detroit area as well as all areas in carrying out that plan. And as I mentioned, the partners are absolutely essential. And to the extent that we can better coordinate and assist those partners, the better.
Thank you.
Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Dr. Dillingham and your staff. Could you explain to me why is the information from the U.S. Postal Service not sufficient to provide you with your base maps and where you send information on the census?
Congresswoman, the information from the Postal Office is very helpful, very valuable. But we have to reach everyone, and it actually is not quite sufficient. So not only do we use the postal information, there are rural communities and other locations for which there may be mailboxes and other things that need to be coordinated. So not all residences actually are on the mail list. So we, as I recall, I could be wrong on this, something like 87% are accounted for by the postal mail addresses. But we need to, and it may be higher, but we need to add to that, and we do add to that. We do aerial surveillance. We do a lot of different ways to find out where people are living, and sometimes we actually, this morning, someone was discussing with me in certain areas of the country where people are mobile, where they're living. They're actually traveling in recreational vehicles and living out of those vehicles. So we have to capture them even where there isn't a mailing address.
So driver's licenses are important, perhaps.
We actually, Title 13 tells us that we are to use administrative data to the maximum extent possible to help carry out our surveys and our censuses. And so we do that. We do various data sets, and federal agencies share data with us, et cetera, so we can verify certain essential information, including addresses.
It's good to know, though, that it sounds like over 80% of the households you need to reach would be at addresses that the Postal Service has, so they're very important.
It may be higher than that.
They're very, very important in your work. In past census documents, there were on the, not the short form, but the long form, the ability of a family to indicate its heritage if they chose to do that. Will that be on this year's census?
The questions we have on this year's census, we have race and ethnicity, two separate questions, and there is the ability for people to write in. So we have an other category, and we also have where people can write in their answer.
But you're not providing the list that
No,
used to...
we provide a list, a relatively comprehensive list,
Okay.
but at the same time, there's some anomalies in the historic research that sometimes over time people actually can change their race and ethnicity as to how they report it.
Thank you for that statement. I was looking for, you had in your testimony, here we go. On page 6, you talk about the various organizations you're partnering with, the Library Association, Boys and Girls Clubs, Latino elected officials. I represent a region where we have vast ethnic and racial diversity. So I'm just going to tick off some groups and tell me if you think you would partner with some of these organizations. Albanian, Lebanese, Puerto Rican. We have many, maybe Congressman Serrano already went over this, I don't know, but as a result of the tragedies in Puerto Rico, we have many citizens moving to Ohio, literally thousands. And so that would be an important organizational category. Polish, Turkish, Arab American, Hungarian. I can't speak for Congresswoman Beatty in Columbus, but there are several new immigrants from countries in Africa. And so I guess my question is, how are you linking to the national organizations or state organizations that these individuals belong to? How do you link to them?
Congresswoman, we are doing it in many different ways. Just by way of example, when I was in Chicago, I went to a focus group where we were discussing the census with the Polish community. And in their language. This was a focus group with people that did not speak English but spoke Polish. And so we have more than 100 focus groups across the nation where we're looking at these communities and talking with them. And sometimes it's very important because in our instructions and in our outreach media, one word can matter. It could be that a translator would want to use this word, maybe with an academic background, but the community may have a different interpretation of that word. So not only in our materials and our outreach, but particularly in our partnerships, we invite all those communities to partner with us. So if there are associations and groups and our partnership specialists actually will be hiring from those communities. We're making every effort that we hire people from those communities as our enumerators as well. So
excuse me, I interrupt. Would you permit the members of the Ohio delegation on a bipartisan basis to give you a list of the groups they're aware of in Ohio?
Absolutely, and we
Okay.
will give you further information how we've engaged in outreach to date, but we would be glad to work with those groups.
All right, I thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Meng.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, and all of you for being here and your service as well. I wanted to sort of piggyback off of what Congresswoman Kaptur was talking about in terms of partnering with local organizations, especially in these communities of colors, immigrant communities. It remains imperative that the federal government take its responsibility seriously and continue to invest in engaging these hard-to-count communities over the next year. I appreciate you going around the country. I know that you were in New York last week as well, and I thank you for engaging. Wanted to talk about the partnership plan and where the Census Bureau is in its hiring process for partnership staff, and are you on track?
Congresswoman, again, that's an excellent question. We did experience some delay in setting up the partnership specialists and bringing them on board. Within a month, we'll be back on track. We had very ambitious goals. As I mentioned this morning, I was informed that we had more than 900 either hired or had accepted the positions. So out of the 1,500, we have about 2/3 that will soon be operational. But we do have already, and when I did do a tour of areas of New York City, including your district, we did have partnership specialists in place in some of those areas. And as a matter of fact, I was in a van and we pulled over to the curb and I spoke for the Region 1, which includes New York all the way through Maine. I spoke to some 69 partnership specialists who were on the phone, and I was encouraging them and commending them for the job they're doing. So that's a very important area, and we are looking at other ways to make sure that these partnership specialists are working with the partners. I thought I might have the list from your district, but I did see a lengthy list of partners in your area, and I'm told that list is growing daily. So we appreciate members of Congress that are assisting, and their staffs that are assisting with these partnership efforts. And it is a good way for both the Congress to stay involved with what's going on in their districts, and for these people to express their opinions about the needs and the coordination, et cetera. So we think we know we've devoted more resources to partnerships than ever before. We think nationally, when we combine all the partnerships at the national, state, and local government level and the community level, that we will have more than 300,000, which will be a significant increase over the last decennial census. But bringing on all those partners also creates work. So we will need to coordinate that work and make sure that our partnership specialists are both skilled at it and committed to it, and I think you will find they are.
Thank you. And I want to echo Congresswoman Kaptur's request in relation to New York, if we can be helpful in working with you on this growing list of partnership organizations, but also specifically wanted to find out about the seemingly lack of language support for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, as well as Alaska Natives and American Indians outside of Navajo. We are told that the Census Bureau is not providing translated language assistant guides, whether in print or video, for these communities.
Sure. Well, we are in the process of ensuring, and some of the translation services, I'm not sure they're completed as yet, but we will offer the census questionnaire in 13 languages, including English. That reaches more than 99% of the nation's population. But in addition to that, we will have a total of 59 translated materials. I'm told that those materials will represent groups that exceed 2,000 in number, that have special language needs. In addition to that, though, our partnership specialists are tasked with finding how to reach, if they find these communities, say it's 100 people in a community that have a special language not covered by the materials and not covered by the questionnaires, then we will find trusted sources in that community. If it's sizable enough, in some instances, particularly tribal areas, we will hire partnership specialists from those communities. But in the event that we don't have a specialist that has that language, we will find someone with that language skill. And so we have the ability to contract and hire on a temporary basis people with those language skills once we identify them, and that's part of the responsibility of the partnership specialists.
Thank you. And I would just quickly ask the last part of my questioning. Last year's hearing before the subcommittee, then Acting Director Jarman confirmed two things. One, that unanswered survey questions were marked as item non-response. And two, not answering some questions on the census survey would not negate the entire survey response, but responses to answered questions would still be tabulated. About 2 months ago, Chairman Serrano and I sent a letter urging you to publicly confirm that full consideration and count of household census survey responses will be conducted regardless of any potential unanswered questions in the form. We're still waiting a response to this letter. Do you know why, or what has the Commerce Secretary instructed officials of the Census Bureau in relation to this issue?
Congresswoman, the Deputy Director's observations were correct. I apologize if the committee has not yet received our response. I have been advised that the response would be issued in short order recently, and we will be getting you a response on that.
Okay. Do you know now before the letter, and I appreciate your
The
pending
Deputy
response.
Director had a correct answer to that question.
So if the citizenship question is added to the 2020 decennial census and it happens to be left unanswered on a survey, would that survey still be counted?
I can assure you that we encourage everyone to answer all questions.
Yes.
But it is the historical practice of the Census Bureau in all censuses and surveys that we have varying rates at which questions are answered, and sometimes we can detect that sometimes some answers may not be fully accurate. So we do accommodate that. We have some of the best and brightest that work on resolving that, but we will accept the information online, on phone, or on paper that may have some areas that are not totally complete.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Director, your budget request for the 2020 census is $6.149 billion, which is significantly less than your life cycle cost estimate, and does not include a contingency fund that the Secretary had previously asked for. Given the uncertainty and controversy surrounding this census under this administration, how can you justify these proposed reductions?
Mr. Chairman, let me thank you for asking that question, and let me thank the GAO, who is always encouraging us and pointing out the wisdom in having a complete and accurate cost estimate. And we do go through the process and use the procedures prescribed by the GAO, very elaborate procedures to making sure that our cost estimates are well documented, that they're accurate, they're credible, and that they're comprehensive. As you pointed out correctly, the The earlier estimate for the total cost of the census was at about $12.5 billion, and that was in 2017. The secretary, when he came in, he wanted a reexamination of that and wanted to make sure that we had sufficient resources to get the job done. As a result of that, both the Census Bureau and the Department of Congress applied their best talents to that process, and they developed and they reconciled an independent cost estimate. And that independent cost estimate was $14.1 billion. And then the secretary subsequently, based on his business experience and business acumen, wanted even that re-examined and to see if there might be a need for additional funding. So there was a $15.6 billion life cycle cost estimate that was developed. And it really was an extension of the independent cost estimate with adding some additional contingencies. And those contingencies were considered to be the unknowns. What if something that we can't project happens? Example might be a natural disaster, something of that magnitude. Would it be advisable to have funds built into the budget for such a purpose? Well, the current budget request is built on the $14.1 billion independent cost estimate that the Bureau and the Department had agreed to that followed the GAO guidance. Over time, built on successes and time-tested operations, some of the built-in contingencies that we had expected did not occur. So now we're at the stage of execution. So now we're less than a year away. We haven't incurred those contingencies, yet we still have a little over $1 billion in a contingency fund. So if, as a result of our current research this summer or other factors, we have to shift some areas of responsibility, some priorities, we do have basically $1 billion in contingency funding, and some of that comes from the carryover funds that this committee had approved for us. So we currently are very confident, based on our experience and considering the contingencies and rationale built into the independent cost estimate, that it can get the job done. So we can get the job done. We're projecting getting the job done at $14.1 billion total life cycle cost built on the independent cost estimate, but it is at a total figure that was below what had been considered. So we haven't had those contingencies. We don't think we're going to experience those contingencies. We have a contingency budget that we think can accommodate some variations in the self-response rate, which is one of the primary considerations, and that's why the current budget request is based on, consistent with the $14.1 billion independent cost estimate.
Well, it's very important, Director, that the Bureau stay in touch with us and with our staff to let us know how things are going, because what we don't want it as legislators, staff doesn't want it, and you don't want, is for people to say we shortchanged the census after all the fuss we made about getting a fair and accurate count. So please, don't be, I can't believe I'm saying this, don't be shy about asking, okay?
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate that.
I didn't say that. Director Dillingham, a critical component of adding a new question to the census testing is testing it. Unfortunately, the citizenship question will only be tested for the first time this summer, with results that will come in too late to mitigate impacts. What is Commerce's plan if the results of this test conclude that self-response rates in 2020 will be far lower than what it's currently assumed and budgeted for? For that matter, will the test be canceled if the Supreme Court finds that the citizenship question should not be included in the census?
Mr. Chairman, we think the tests that we're doing this summer and the research and analytics associated with it are very prudent, because we want to see if something that we had not projected occurs in administering the census with the question as well as without. This test will be completed regardless. It's going to inform us to the future. It will provide very valuable information, but it was instigated for purposes of operational needs. If we see an area in which we need to devote more resources, that is what we intend to do. So we think it's going to be very valuable to conduct that research, to use that research to see if we see a need, and then we have the $1 billion contingency fund that we can, within certain parameters, accommodate those findings from that research. If there is some percentage point drop in the self-response rate, we have a cushion built into the contingency funding that we can accommodate that. We're not expecting anything dramatic outside those parameters, and so we think we're on course for doing a complete count.
Thank you, Mr. Goldenkopf or Mr. Marinos. With respect to the 2019 census test, what will GAO be looking for in terms of how this test and its results can be utilized, given the results won't be available until October?
We're going to be looking at the rigor of the test. We've looked at it on its face, and so far the methodology appears to have some face validity to it. As Dr. Dillingham already mentioned, the purpose of the test was to look to see what the citizenship question, how that might affect the non-response follow-up workload and some of the additional operational requirements that might be needed. So we'll be looking at the results, and then we'll see how the Census Bureau is reacting to the results of the test, the extent to which they are incorporating the results of that test into their operations.
I would echo Mr. Goldenkopf. I think the one thing to articulate, maybe stating the obvious here, is that the reality is any late changes to a process are going to introduce risk. So I think it just highlights those high-risk areas that we've articulated within this area recently.
Director, a question that's not on my list. Staff hates that when I do that, you know.
My staff does as well.
Yeah. People at times respond to people they know and they see and they follow. So will you be, in your advertising campaign, or will the people that you hire for the advertising campaign be willing to look at, you know, professional athletes, people in the Hollywood community, you know, Broadway people, just to say, listen, I'm so-and-so and you should be counted?
Mr. Chairman, we'd like to brief you on that campaign, where we are, and especially as we have some of the products to share with you. I can say that a lot of thought is going into just that. We do, particularly with some of our subcontractors that are focused on hard-to-count groups and special groups, trying to determine who is the trusted voice for that community. And I am informed in various instances with some of those communities, they have identified people they think are trusted voices. Some might be from the, might have a background in athletics or similar types of, they're well known in those communities. At the same time, we have to be very careful with doing that, because sometimes a public persona, the image or the activities can give rise to unknowns in that area. So it's a trade-off. We're looking at trusted voices, but particularly in administering our campaign at the local level, we want local trusted voices as part of our partnership arrangement. So the mayors that I have visited with, and I will be going to the mayors conference, the ones I have talked with are all on board for partnering with us. But the national figures and those associated with certain communities, we are examining that, and I expect there will be some of that, and particularly people recognizable in those communities. I don't want to get into any of those communities right now because nothing's been finally settled on.
Okay. I can tell you, for instance, that in the Latino community, Univision and Telemundo last time, I don't know if they were subcontractors or what, or they took it on their own, But it was a huge campaign where they would, every 10 minutes, they were telling people, count yourself, and explaining to them the importance of it and what it meant, you know, and the fact that that information could not be shared and so on. So,
And I think you'll be seeing that again in this decennial census.
Idaho.
Thank you. Just going back to the budget question that the chairman asked about, of course, the president's budget proposed $7.2 billion for the census for FY 2020, if I'm correct. And that was a level that's below the Secretary's estimate of funding needs as of last year. And as you know, there's a little outside census analysts have said it's too low for the Bureau to complete all its needs in the decade's final year. Can you talk a little bit about that and how I know you mentioned that a little bit earlier, but talk a little bit more about that in light of the fact that there are some that census analysts have said that it's too low.
Ranking Member Adderholt, as I said, we are on course, and we're on budget, and we're on schedule, and consistent with the President's budget and the $14.1 billion. That's no guarantee about the future. Something totally unexpected and unknown could occur, and that's what was built into that $15.6 billion estimate. There were certain contingencies. It was a sensitivity analysis that was included that looked at potential increases in wages, perhaps diminished productivity, and perhaps significantly diminished response rates. So the sensitivity analysis, as well as a category that internally we called it the unknown unknowns, and that was just, in my mind, I consider it sort of an insurance policy if the unexpected occurs. We're down to the wire now. We're less than a year away. We're executing the plan, and we haven't experienced the kind of things that the unknown unknowns as of yet. And we are very, very confident that we're on course to complete a full and accurate count at the $14.1 billion life cycle cost level. So that's kind of where we are, and we are working very hard. We're on budget. Our operations is consistent with that budget, and so that's the budget we're working under at present.
And that includes for the 2020 as well. You include that in that as well as.
Yeah, well, that is correct. That was for the 2020 census. That's correct.
Oh, but for the 2020 request for the.
The 2020 request, we have. I think we had a $6.3 billion request, and then we had a carryover of $1 billion. So that made it the 7.2, 7.3 figure.
Okay, all right. Let me, GAO, give me your thoughts on the budget adequacy request.
You know, we've looked at the budget. We've spoken to Census Bureau officials. We think it's good that there is a contingency fund, especially the unknowns. Our focus, too, was also on the justification for that budget with a life cycle cost estimate. That's been an ongoing challenge for the Bureau to come up with a reliable cost estimate. We've seen some improvements there. So one of the things that we were looking for was the extent to which the budget was actually justified within the life cycle cost estimate. And so now we've seen that, that $14 billion that is baked into the cost estimate, and so that's a good thing. And then in subsequent conversations with Census Bureau officials, as we've heard today, the director feels that the amount of money is adequate to conduct a complete and accurate count.
Regarding the census, let me, on my last question, how do you determine where a person should be counted if they're in a transitory location or they're a foreign citizen that's spending some time here in the United States for a period of time? How do you go about in your calculation of trying to count them?
Ranking Member, that's an excellent question, and there's an art to it and a science to it. In discussing some of those issues recently with the head of our decennial census, with many years of experience, and I must say that in conducting the census, we're very honored to have institutional knowledge, experience, and history from which we are building. So even though, as GAO points out, we have a number of innovations, we also have a history of what we've done and how we're doing it. So in that regard, the transitory populations, sometimes it may require a judgment call. But if we know people are here on a temporary basis, if they're visiting from another country, if they're a tourist or whatever, we don't count them. However, you can change the information somewhat, and if they're staying here and want to stay here, and the time at which they're leaving is indefinite, and they've been here 6 months or longer, then we're probably going to count them. Where were you on April the 1st? Because you're not giving us any information that you're leaving anytime soon. So a lot of it is a factual determination, and we have guidance and criteria, but that is both a challenge and as I said, there's an art to it that sometimes we have to seek out that information.
So one of the determining factors is their intent to reside.
Intent certainly is very important. That is correct. But if they've been here, you know,
say someone is visiting from another country and, and are here and staying here for 6 months doing a research project, and they're here on April 1st.
If they are absolutely sure that they're leaving, and they've been here for the 6 months bothers me a little bit because that's most of the year. But if it is absolutely certain they're leaving and they know they were
So
here,
they're going to be here for 7 months.
Well, that's again I would have to consult with our experts and see how they're doing that. But
they're here just for the purpose of maybe conducting a study. They're and they're doing a study, but they obviously don't want to live in a hotel for 7 months.
Sure. You know, one of the things about the census is we're counting the people that are living here. So at some point we draw lines. Those lines are not, to my understanding and the information I have, those are not solid lines, but they do sometimes require further inquiry as to the nature of their stay, the length of their stay, and what their intent is.
So they could be counted then.
They could be counted with certain facts are that they've been living here for a significant period of time, and it's indefinite and not sure when they're going back to wherever they're from. Yes.
So would they ask that question about their intent to leave?
In the non-response follow-up, our enumerators have a series of questions, and they're trained to ask professionally those questions, and then the information will be entered in accordance with their assessment of that individual set of facts.
Yeah, because it's a question like this makes your job hard. I mean,
it does.
I mean, it's because you have people that may be here for a certain amount of time on April 1st, and you know, unless you really dig down deep into what they're doing here and how long they're going to be here and why they're here, and you know, there's a lot
there's a lot to it, and particularly when people are, for example, as you're well aware, we have special circumstances when people are in prison or in certain group quarters, and we have different criteria for all that. And as I pointed out earlier, if someone is living out of their mobile home or recreational vehicle, not only do we need to count them, but we need to assign them a location. And so there will be judgments will be made based on the individual facts of that circumstance.
And I've got one more question. You mentioned that you had been to Congressman Serrano's district and met with some folks in Congresswoman Lowy's district and Congresswoman Lawrence's district. What's the chance we'll get you to Alabama?
We're working on that, Congressman. We have made inquiries and not yet quite made a commitment as to and check the schedules, but we have asked, and we will be
Can we work with you on that to try to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll be working with your office.
Okay, perfect. All right, I yield back.
I encourage you as chairman of this committee to go to Alabama. But you know, the ranking member brings up an interesting question, though. People who know me know that it's very hard for me to do one hearing without mentioning Puerto Rico, Frank Sinatra, or baseball. So there are baseball players who come here April 1st when the season starts. They stay here till September. If they're lucky, they go into October, right? And some of them do that year after year after year. Do they get counted here?
I understood, and I'm not an expert on the baseball players and the time in which they're in the country, but if they're here for extended period of time, they're here on April 1st, I would imagine, especially if they're here for the majority of the year, they will probably be counted. But I don't hold me to that because I don't know, you know, if we, how hard they are to catch. You know, I'm not sure we can.
Oh, that's a nice pun there. Some of them are very difficult at catching, yes. Well, anyway, they show up in February for spring training, then they don't leave till the end of September, and some stay till October. And if you've got a good career, you do that every single year.
I would imagine.
And then you have thousands in the minor leagues in the same situation. Just not an important question, but a fun question.
It is important to them, perhaps.
Yes, right. How does Commerce intend to use the data provided by DHS for its decennial operation?
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, by law, Congress has provided that we will, to the maximum extent possible, use administrative data, particularly for, I call it quality assurance activities. So we receive data. We receive sensitive data. Census Bureau has special statutory authorities, and we use that data to make sure that our censuses and our surveys are accurate and complete. So the data comes in, the data does not go back. So if DHS provides us with data, we will use that data for our purposes, but we do not send data back to those federal agencies.
But you can see where this adds to the issue. I mean, certain bells go off when you say citizenship question, and other bells go off when you hear DHS will be providing information to the census. This is going on in prior years, prior censuses?
I can't say historically how, but I can say there are other sensitive data sources where we have the same issue. In this forum, but it's well known. We have access to certain Social Security and IRS data for purposes of verifying our data, but it's a one-way street. That data comes to us, and we use that data for, I'll call it quality assurance purposes, and the data does not flow out.
Okay, so we don't know if it's been done before in other censuses.
With DHS, I would have to check to see when that started.
That's important because that will be a concern of some people if that gets published a lot. You know, there are people here that are going to publish it right now. Recognizing you may intend to use the data as administrative records toward identifying non-citizens' locations at the block level, wouldn't this exercise eliminate your need for a citizenship question on the 2020 census form altogether?
Mr. Chairman, the need and the decision to have the citizenship question is before the Supreme Court, and what we have to do as an agency and what I have to do as the director is not to take a position on the inclusion of that question, and we're waiting for the court to decide the question.
Let me just ask something. This will be my last question, Mr. Adderholt, if you have any questions. Something I've asked for a long time, and I've gotten various answers that all mean no. But if you're an American citizen living in Puerto Rico, which is almost redundant if you were born there, right? You don't get counted. You get counted in Puerto Rico, but you don't get counted in the final number as to what the population of the United States is. Now, at the expense of being written up as being anti-immigrant, which God and every reporter knows I'm not, technically, you could be undocumented in one of the states and get counted in the final population number, which is correct. But you're living in Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Samoa, Guam, you know, the Mariana Islands, and you won't get counted in the final number. So when we say, for argument's sake, the United States has 350 million people, not really. It's got closer to 356 or 57 because those folks don't get included. Have you heard anything during your tenure there as to Serrano's mantra on including everybody under the American flag.
Mr. Chairman, I have
Notice
heard-
how I said it. Everybody under the American flag should be counted.
Sure.
There are people in Europe, as you know, that are allowed to vote in our elections because they're Americans living in Europe. I don't know what that arrangement is. I also understand that they get counted in the census, and yet they're not living under the American flag.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to widen this line of inquiry, but I have been advised that you've expressed concerns with the wording of the question for people in Puerto Rico, how they report their information, and also I'm now apprised that you're concerned about the tabulation of it. Now, on the wording of the question, the information that I received was that the current wording of the question was developed by people that, researchers that were studying it to improve the response, and that in fact it has done that. That being said, with all of our questions, we continuously revisit our questions to see if improvements can be made. And I would say the same holds true for the tabulation of our data. I am not specifically aware, and would be glad to work with you and your staff on your concerns with the tabulation and whether there are ways that we might be able to be of assistance or even to reconsider some of those practices. So we're very open. We're open with all of our questions. We're open with all of our tabulations for areas of improvement, and I'd be glad to work with you and your staff in looking at that.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're open, but I think one of the answers we got throughout the years, and I probably shouldn't tell you this, but somebody will tell you, a lawyer will tell you, was, as the Constitution says, count people amongst the states, which speaks to the citizenship question, right? People, not citizens. But on the other hand, these are territories. But I'm not sure that when that was written in the Constitution, there were people thinking ahead to the fact that someday you would have territories with citizens living in those territories and people who are born, as I was, an American citizen. I was born no different than someone who was born in New York, than my son who was born in New York.
Mr. Chairman, again, we'll work with you on that. I can't promise you that if something has constitutional underpinnings that I'm in a position to change it, but
Shouldn't
we'll
have
look and see what we
mentioned
can
that,
do. Yes, certainly.
Well, Mr. Alaho? I want to thank you for coming here. As you know, we pay a lot of attention to the census. All Americans should. Sometimes I wonder why some folks in some states go out of their way to defund the census and so on when it actually helps them if everybody got counted. I also understand, unfortunately, that some people have problems with people who are not here documented. I don't understand it really, but I understand those feelings that they have. You know, they have them and that's it. I have to deal with that, try to change their mind. But they sometimes forget that those folks get counted, and that means dollars for their state. It means congressional districts for their state, and it means other things. And so we take this very seriously. We want to help you in making the best and most accurate count. We're on your side, notwithstanding our line of questioning or how we ask you about dollars and cents. We want this to work, and we want it to work properly. So we thank you for today.
Thank you, Mr.
And the hearing is adjourned.